Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is American Truck Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper. I did a delivery offline. I didn't make you guys watch it. I was actually listening to something else, and I just let me just drive around California a little bit. I didn't really have a rant, but I wanted to play some. So we got 118,000 bucks. So it's a little bit more than the last time you saw it. And let's see, where are we here? I don't remember. Um, I think I'm in California. I think I'm in Redding. Or Red. No, wait. I can't remember the town. Sacramento, maybe. Somewhere near there, I think. It's somewhere in California. It was a fairly short trip. It was just one of these like, oh, it'll take about half an hour to do. And I was listening to. I was actually listening to something I'm going to talk about. I was listening to a video Luke Hart put out, and I'm going to do kind of my version of it. So we're here at rest stop, which is where I stopped to kind of recover my rest, my energy. And there's a gas station over there, so let's see if I can figure out how to get over there. Can we go around the back? I think we can. And we'll get gas, and then once we fill up, we will go to find another job. And once we do that, we will start our rant, or at least on the way to the job. But let's go ahead and get some gas first, and we'll fill up. I hope you guys are enjoying watching me play this game. I don't know that very many people are. It seems like a lot more people are watching this than who have watched my tennis. I haven't played tennis in a while. I'm going the wrong way here, but that's okay. I haven't played the tennis in a while for a variety of reasons. One of them is that I've been spending a lot of my time, other than occasionally doing some rants on American Truck Simulator, which I can do without my brain being too focused the way it is when I play tennis. I've been spending a lot of time working on the Legend Keeper site that I've created for my players for my play-by-post campaign, which is going to be set in the world of Harn. So I'm pretty excited about that, but I've been spending a lot of time working on that, and I haven't really played many video games. I've let sort of Starfield sort of fall by the wayside. I need to get back into that too. And my semester's gotten really busy. We're in the last couple months, last like sort of month and a bit, and so yeah, I've been pretty busy. So I haven't done any tennis. I don't think anybody cares because hardly anyone watches those. So I don't know if I'm going to keep posting those. It's sort of no point if it's got 0 views. I don't really need to post them. I might keep recording them in case someday I want to post them, but I don't know. Anyway, let's go ahead and find a job, and then we will talk about what I wanted to chat about today. Not really so much rant. And what I'd like to do is see if I can get a job in Washington, Idaho, Oregon, or something, so we can head on north and get some stuff in the Pacific Northwest. But where we are right now is Redding. We are in Redding. I thought we were in Redding. So let's see where we can go from Redding. Oh, there's Yakima. We were pulling a load of cars. Okay, I'll take that. That's pretty good. That'll get us up into Oregon and Washington, and then we're way up on that corner, and then we can kind of try to run from Washington all the way down to, like, well, I don't know if we go down to Texas, but maybe Arizona or Utah or something, and go diagonally that way and pick up some new city unlocks, that sort of thing. So we're 26 miles from the destination, so let's go ahead and head on over and pick up this load of cars, which I really enjoy pulling loads of cars. I don't know why. It just looks cool on the truck, and I don't know. It's kind of neat. I guess one of the reasons I like it is I only started getting those loads very recently, and I think it has to do with the fact that when I used to level up, I never picked whatever it is, the fragile load or whatever it is that the car counts as. And now that we have enough of that leveled up, it's starting to offer it to us. So this is, I think, the first time we've done it, and we should make some good bucks. I didn't really look at the price, so it doesn't matter. I'm mostly just trying to get some sort of getting to cities I haven't been to before and states I haven't been to before, because once you get every city in a state, you get an achievement. I don't think I've ever gotten every city in a state because I keep restarting this game. So we're going to head over, and as we do, what I want to do is sort of do my own version of something Luke posted today. So Luke posted a video that's sort of like 20 things that your DM wishes that you knew. He said, if you're here, hopefully you're here because your DM pointed you here and you're a player. And of course, I'm not. I'm a game master. But he said, here are 20 things that your game master wishes you knew. Well, he said DM, but I'll say GM, right? Because I don't play D&D anymore. Here are some things that your game master wishes you knew, or would like for you to do, or something like that. And he said a lot of stuff that I agree with. One of them is that that you should help everybody at the table have fun. He didn't use this word, but it's basically what I've been saying, which is that we're all stewards of each other's fun at the table. And he said a bunch of others. So what I thought I would do is go ahead and give and I don't know how many things this is going to be because I didn't script any of this. I never do. I just sort of free form, stream of consciousness talk about stuff, as anyone who's listened to these can easily tell. Once in a while I'll script something, but I haven't done that for American Truck Simulator. It's been a while since I've done where I've made an outline ahead of time. So I was thinking about, okay, so what are the things that I would like to tell players? Now, my players mostly know this, but if I'm a GM just sort of giving advice to players as, here are the things that I as a GM think that other GMs would probably want you to know, what would I say? And I think one of the things I would say is that you should remember that the GM is your friend. And I know that this isn't always the case because sometimes you're playing with strangers, but at most tables and most of the time, even when you are playing with somebody who's, if not a paid GM, somebody you met online or on D&D Beyond forum or something, the GM wants to be your friend, and they're doing what they're doing, again, unless they're being paid, they're doing what they're doing as a labor of love, and because they like what they do and they like making fun times for you. The GM is usually your friend. And actually, one of the reasons I want to say this is because as I was thinking about this, I was reminded of a moment that occurred years ago. I want to say it's about 22 years ago, when two of my friends and I were playing the game Neverwinter Nights cooperatively. And we had run through a bunch of user-made modules together. Our first party, we started with the Keep on the Borderlands, which is awesome. It so spoiled us. It was such a well-done module. Got our characters to 4th or 5th level, and then we did, I can't remember what else we did. We did the Spires of Ravenloft, which was an awesome one, also very well done. We did the War of the Yellow Fang Part 1, and I was always bummed they never did another part because the guy who did that was so good. It was such an awesome, probably my favorite adventure that I ever played in Neverwinter Nights, made by a modder. And then we played against the Giants, I think, or I don't remember. And eventually we got our characters at 20th level, and we finished off at 19th. I think we started at 19th level just so that we could level up, but we finished off with the Tomb of Horrors. My gosh, we had to reload that. Our characters died so many times. What a fun time. And we had a blast playing all these modules. So what we would do is we would go through and would look for, okay, for the next campaign, we've got to find user-made modules that connect. So, for example, we want to find a level 1 to something module, say 1 to 4, and then if we have a level 1 to 4 module, we're going to need a level 4 or 5 to like 7 or 8 module, and so on and so forth. And so we had gotten this module I won't name, it was named after and based on a real world module. And so we thought, okay, this looks cool. It had some pretty good ratings. And we then, we went to download it and play it, and I think it was level 5 to 8. I was playing an Elven Ranger Rogue. And I can't remember what everything my other friends were playing, but I was playing an Elven Ranger Rogue, and this was part of the issue. The writer of the module was extremely, what's the word? Holier than thou, in a way, if you want to call it that. He thought that everybody plays D&D wrong, and I'm going to make you play it right. So what's one way to play it right is you have to have a rogue in the party. You must. And so there was a section in it where like you were looking for clues, things like footprints in the snow and stuff. And instead of having it do, which you could easily do, I was making modules and coding in Neverwinter Nights, so I knew how to do this. But and I know what he did in part because I went and looked at the code later. But what he did was he checked your rogue level, and if you didn't have at least 4 or 5 levels of rogue, 6 levels of rogue, right? He didn't believe in multi-classing. He didn't like any of that. You simply couldn't find the footprints. And this is ridiculous. It's a perception check in most games. Whether my character has levels of rogue shouldn't determine whether she's capable of tracking, and why wouldn't a ranger be capable of tracking footprints in the snow just as well, if not better, than a rogue? And so, his attitude was, you have to have a rogue in this adventure, and if you don't have enough levels of rogue, you just can't pass. He did a bunch of other stuff we didn't like. One of the things he said was he didn't like the fact that everybody's walking around with too much loot, way over the level range that you should have. And so what he said was, you can't come into this adventure with loot. So he had a spot where you meet the GM, and he basically pontificates to you about how you're playing D&D wrong and you're going to have to play it right when you play this module. And then he says, if you step through this door, all of your loot is gone forever. And my friends and I didn't like this because we were like 5th level at this point. We had played an entire module before this, and each of us had earned from that previous module a cool, unique magic item. They weren't particularly powerful, but these magic items were mementos of the previous adventure. The noble lady who you saved from being kidnapped or whatever hands you her tiara, and it's like, I don't know, +1 armor class. It's not a big deal. But that tiara means something. It's the Lady Glenoth's silver tiara. And it's a unique item that you could only get in that module from completing that quest. And my character completed the quest, so I have the tiara, or whatever. I'm making that up. Well, I think I had a sword that was like a +1, but it meant something. It wasn't just a +1 sword. It had a little something extra on it or whatever. It was an heirloom or a memento or whatever. So we each had something from the previous module, and we didn't mind going into this adventure without it. But when we came out of the adventure to play other modules, we wanted it back, right? You can take our stuff away for this module, but not permanently. And he was deleting it. So we didn't like this. So I said, guys, give me a minute. Give me a few minutes. And what I did was we turned the module off, and I said, we're going to have to restart the module. And what I did was I created a chest and a teleport. And so I can't remember how I did it, but I created a chest where we could put our items into the chest, and it would teleport in with the items in it into the next room that we were going to go into naked, and then we could take our items back out. And what we agreed was we won't equip any of the items, but we're keeping them because they're ours, and we won't equip them. We'll play the module straight the way he intended us to play it, without the magic items. He only wanted us to get the magic items that he put in there. Okay, we'll play his game, but we're not going to lose our items. And as we were going through this discussion and deciding what to do, and dealing with the really obnoxious spam of text of this DM NPC that was standing in the room pontificating to us about how we don't play D&D correctly, and how he's going to make us play it right, and so on, and all the other strictures that he had on there, one of my best friends, I was playing with my 2 best friends, and the one guy said, I don't know, the other guy said this guy's obnoxious or whatever, and the other guy said, this, by the way, the good Rob, the guy who's the awesome GM that I said is the greatest GM I ever played under, he said, well, there are 2 models of DMing. The DM as your best friend and the DM as angry God. And clearly this guy has gone for the angry god model. And so I thought about that recently. I thought about that while I was watching Luke Hart's video, which was, he doesn't actually have this as one of his bullets, but the video is titled "No, your GM doesn't hate you" or something like that. And I thought about that, and I thought, no, your GM doesn't. Your GM is your friend. And there really are these two models, right? The GM is angry god, and the GM is best friend. And I think that one of the reasons I've always enjoyed playing role-playing games is because I played them with my friends, and none of us ever played the angry god model. We all played the GM's best friend model, the player's best friend model. And so what I would say to players is, unless the GM demonstrates being an angry god like this, assume that the GM wants to be your friend, and the GM is your friend, and approach it that way. If the GM does stuff you don't like, it's not because they want to hurt you or your character. They probably thought it would be fun, and maybe it's just not as fun as they thought, or it was going to go one way in their head, and then they just didn't execute it. That happens to me all the time. I'm imagining in my head how this is going to go, and then when it actually happens, I just don't execute it the way I want it. And yeah, we're human. We make mistakes, and we often come up with ideas that are, we bite off more than we can chew, or ideas that are bigger or grander or require more finesse than we have. My best friend, one of the guy who said I don't like this guy, not the good Rob, but the other friend that I still play D&D with, when he took over in Candlekeep for 6 months, he was constantly frustrated by his own inability to do the things that he was envisioning he was going to do as part of our, during that campaign, right? He had battles he was very unhappy with. I know he wasn't happy with the very end. The final session took longer than he expected, and then I had to step out, and then everybody was getting tired, and he wanted to keep going because he can go till 3 in the morning, and people were like, no, we're tired, we need to stop. And he tried to rush it, and then in the end it just all turned into a Discord post where he finished it up, and it was very anticlimactic. I know he didn't like that. I know he didn't want that. He was picturing this awesome session that was going to be so cool and exciting, and it ended up taking too long and being boring, and not necessarily boring, but just it was gosh, I almost missed this exit. It was too long and too complicated, and the complication led to it being, I don't want to say boring isn't the right word, but it dragged, right? It was, everything took too long because it was overcomplicated, and he had too much going on, and he was trying to build to this really awesome climax, and it didn't go the way he wanted. We didn't do the things. He said to me several times in frustration, you guys aren't doing anything like what I expected. So he wasn't trying to make it a miserable time, right? He was trying to make it cool, and it was cool in his head. And then when the rubber met the road and he was trying to run things, and you've got 85 things you're doing at once as a GM, it's really hard to make what you're imagining in your head come true. That's why I've sort of learned to try not to imagine too much in my head and just sort of, let what happens happen. And I think I have much better and much less frustrating experience that way. But even that, you still are hoping this is going to be a cool, fun adventure, and sometimes it just doesn't come out the way you expected. But your intent is that it will. And so the first thing I would say is, think of the GM as your friend. Hopefully one of your best friends, and not an angry god, unless the GM starts acting that way. And give the GM the benefit of the doubt, so that if you're thinking of the GM as a friend and they make a ruling you don't like, that your friend's not trying to hurt you. They're just trying to rule in a way that they think is consistent or fits with what it says in the book. And if you don't agree, you don't agree, but you can still play the game. And they're not trying to kill your character or ruin your fun. They're your friend. So the first thing I would say is to keep in mind that the GM is not an angry god. In almost all cases, the GM is your friend, and they want you to have fun. Right? Unless you got some guy who's trying to prove to you that you don't know how to play D&D or Savage Worlds, and you're going to play it right, quote unquote. That's different. But you're almost never going to have that. And most of the time, you can consider the GM your friend, and you'll be correct in considering the GM to be your best friend. Um, so that's the first one that I think I would say. Another thing I would say is to agree with Luke as a GM that I want players to know is it, as I've said many times, but I definitely want to repeat it here. At the table when we're playing together, players and GMs alike, we are all the stewards, the guardians of each other's fun. And you should definitely see your role, your primary role at the table, as being there to be the guardian, the steward of everybody else's fun, so that you make sure that you're keeping an eye on the whole table, including your GM, to make sure that everybody seems to be having fun. And if you start to sense that you're doing something that's reducing the fun of other people, including your GM, you should stop. Stop doing that. So that's the second thing I would say, is realize that you're the steward of everybody else's fun as well as your own. And that one of the things you're trying to do is all have fun together. That's what we're trying to do. And given that that's the case, you have to make sure that you aren't doing anything that's lessening other people's fun. And let them know if they're doing stuff that's lessening your fun. But it can't just be about you, and it can't be selfishness. Because if it's only about what's your fun, if it's only about what you enjoy, then if you end up stepping on the toes of other people and ruining their fun, they're not going to want to play with you. And you're going to end up without a group to play with. So the second thing I would say is that you should be the steward of everybody else's fun at the table. And that includes the GM. Another thing that Luke said that I also agree with is don't argue with the GM at the table. Do not argue with the GM. This does not mean that the GM is always right. As in, the GM is not always correctly interpreting the writing on the rules as it was intended by the authors. Sometimes the GM is misinterpreting the rules, misunderstanding the plain English of the rules, going against the clearly stated intent of the rule writer, right? When sometimes they'll come onto a form or something and saying, this is what I intended and this is how I play it at my table. Which has happened a couple times in Pinnacle, where Clint Black, who's like the lead designer, has said this is what we intended and this is how we play it at our table, and clarified something. So they've made their intent known, and the GM is ruling something that's not that. Right? They can be factually incorrect when they make a ruling. However, whether they're factually incorrect or not, during the session is not the time to argue about it. You object once, politely, to let the GM know you don't agree with this ruling. If the GM says that's the way it's going to stand, leave it alone. I said this way back in a City of Heroes. I think it was Quintessence last. I can't remember, but I said it a long time ago. And my point then is the same now. We have very few precious hours each month when we get together and actually get to play the game. If you're like my group, we're lucky to do it twice a month, every 2 weeks. And sometimes, like the last couple months, we've been delaying and we're averaging more like every 3 weeks. We're lucky to get twice a month. We're lucky to get 3.5 hours before the mom of the little girl says, I've got to go, about 3 hours and 15 minutes in. So we get maybe 7 hours a month. Do you really want to waste half an hour of that 7 hours arguing over a friggin' rule that's only going to affect one roll in combat that would have been over 29 minutes ago if you had just stopped arguing? Don't waste the session arguing with the game master. If you really strongly believe that the rule is being interpreted incorrectly and it's really bothering you, mention it to the GM and say, I'd like to talk about it in between sessions. And then talk about it in between sessions. Do it over email, do it over Zoom, however you want to do it, over the lunch table, Talk about it in between sessions, not at the table. Do not argue with the GM at the table. There's no time for that. Mention once, I'm not sure it should be played this way. If the GM says that's how we play it, even the GM says yes, that is the way it reads, and I know he's wrong. I've got the book open right in front of me. Don't say that. Don't start reading it out loud. Just say, okay, GM, is it all right if we talk about this after the session, tomorrow or something, because I'd like to clarify. Most GMs will say fine. If you have somebody unreasonable who won't talk about the rules, then maybe you need to look for a GM who will. But what I would say is keep in mind how important and precious and rare those hours at the table are, and don't waste a single minute. Do not waste a single minute with pointless arguing over the rules. I don't care if the GM is reading 2 + 2 as 5. Leave it as 5 and argue about it another time. Because these minutes are precious, these hours are precious, and you don't want to waste them on arguing rules. So that's my, third piece of advice. Right? So the GM is your best friend, and you should see him that way. Don't view him as an angry god or her, unless they act that way. You're everybody's stewards of each other's fun, and don't argue with the GM at the table. Those are my first 3 bits of advice for players as a game master. The next bit of advice I would have is that you should be willing to openly discuss your interests and preferences with the game master at the table, while realizing that the game master is balancing those against many other competing factors, such as what other people are saying is fun for them, which may not be the same thing as what's fun for you. One way as a game master that I sort of mitigate against this issue is I always have a session 0 where we talk about what's fun for each other, what's fun for us, right? And the last time I did it, which is absolutely brilliant, because I have really polite players, and if one of them says I like combat and the other ones don't like combat, they won't say anything because they don't want to, upset the other one. So I said, I want you guys to send me your answers. I gave them a bunch of questions, and I said, send me your answers as private messages. Do not send them to the group. And I will compile them, and then we will share them at the table. Now, I did this for a very specific reason, because I suspected, and I ended up being right, that my best friend is an outlier in our group. Even though he got one of the other people as his friend into the group, and then the other 2, one is mine and another is her friend. Even though he got one of the people into the group, I think that person is more like the rest of us and less like my best friend. And what I was seeing was my best friend was sort of almost like obsessed with min-maxing and Ubering out his character and leveling up, and then he was very obsessed with his character's backstory that he had pre-written, and he wanted everything to sort of come into play and all this. And the other players were much more sort of free-forming it, emergent storylining it. They were just going with these very vague starting backgrounds and saying, we'll see where it goes. They didn't care about leveling. They didn't care about min-maxing. And so I got this sense that if I asked them these deep questions about what's your favorite thing to do in role-playing games, what would you like to see more of, what have you never done but you'd like to do, what activity, what's your pet peeve, what activity do you like the most, that kind of thing, that there would be some pretty stark differences between my best friend and all the rest of us. And there were. It wasn't as stark as I expected it to be, because he was a little less insistent than I expected him to be on some of those things. But anyone can see from the answers that he's a bit of an outlier, and the rest of us are all very tightly clustered in the same sort of section for everything. We all gave very similar answers to things like what we want out of a role-playing game, what's our pet peeve, and all of that. And so Or sometimes we would answer the same thing as the other person but to a different question. But all of our preferences are very, very similar. His are close, but they're definitely more different, you know, than the rest of us are from each other. And so this was actually very useful because then I summarized it, I put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and we talked about it. And then I let people sort of reword. Well, I didn't mean it that way, that kind of stuff. That was fine. I tried to clarify some of it with them in private messages, but if I thought I had it right, summarized it, and they said, well, I didn't quite mean that, we fixed it, we talked about it. But this enabled us to all see each other's preferences so that when I, as a game master, start introducing some of these things to the group, right? When I, as a game master, start introducing some of these things to the group, what is going on here? What is going on? When I start introducing these things to the group, look at this. All right, well, I have to break the law and go on the shoulder here because these things aren't moving. I don't know what's going on, but I don't think they're going to move, so hopefully it won't crash. If I introduce something to the group, like let's say, for example, somebody said they like, intrigue, court intrigue, and other people don't. If I start introducing some court intrigue into the group, it's because Joe said that. And you can look back on his Session 0 answers that are in the Discord and see that. We did lines and veils together. We did all of that. So Session 0 can be very helpful for this. But it's important to remember that you don't always know everything, because sometimes players don't share everything with the group, but they share things with the game master. So sometimes you may want something that, if the game master gives it to you, it's going to disenfranchise one of the other players. Or you might want something that the game master isn't going to like at all. And so now you're forcing the game master to choose between something that's going to make them unhappy and something that's going to make you unhappy. I've talked about this before, that a lot of game masters will often take it on the chin in a case like that because they're your friend and they want to make you happy. But there are limits. And if you're going to do something that's going to make the game master woefully miserable, you can't necessarily expect them to go along with that. So obviously it always helps to talk and to communicate with each other, and hopefully the game master will communicate stuff like that to you the way I tried to with my group. But keep in mind that although the game master wants your honest feedback and wants to know what it is that you would like so they can try to put some of that in the game, they can't always put everything. And it may be that some of what you want contradicts with either their plans for the setting, or with what some of the other players want, or with what some of the other players wrote in their secret background, or what have you. And so my fourth piece of advice would be to let the game master know what your likes and dislikes are, and recognize that sometimes the game master can make that stuff happen for you, and sometimes the game master simply can't, because they're trying to please multiple people at the table, and they're often being pulled in multiple opposite directions, and something's got to give. So that's my fourth sort of piece of advice that I would say as a game master that I would like to communicate, not just to my players, but to players in general. The fifth piece of advice I would give to players is to play for the journey, not the end point. I've talked before on multiple occasions about this idea of builds and people building designing a character from level 1 to 20. And so they've got a build, a 7th level bard, 3rd level warlock, 5th level paladin, 5th level wizard. And they picked out all the spells they want and all the feats they want and all the ability score increases and all the rest of that. And they've got it all planned out to 20th level. And you're 1st level and you're starting the Lost Mine of Phandelver. Enjoy playing the Lost Mine of Phandelver. okay? Do that. Give that your attention and play your first, second, third level character. Don't worry about 20th level. I'm not saying you shouldn't plan, but you shouldn't be in it for the purpose of playing your character at 20th level, because you may never get there. In fact, the statistics suggest that you probably won't. You're probably going to play the Lost Mine of Phandelver, and when it's over, that's going to be the end of your game. Maybe, you'll play something else that goes to level 7 or 8, and then that's going to be the end of your game. The GM's wife will have a baby. Or maybe the GM will have a baby and won't be able to GM anymore. 2 of the players will get married and move away. Somebody gets a new job and has to be transferred to another country. And little by little, things change and the campaign ends. Or maybe it doesn't end. This happened to my best friend, but the guy who was game mastering can't continue. So somebody new has to take over, and you're not playing in that world anymore. The new person says, well, I don't want to play in the Forgotten Realms. I want to do Eberron. So make up new characters and start back at level 1. And the character that you planned out to level 20 stopped at level 5 because that game master isn't running anymore. And now you make up a level 1 Warforged and you play an Eberron. And if you plan that one out to 20, well, guess what? The guy who's doing Eberron, he's going to stop at level 10 because he got a new job and he can't run anymore. And that character's not going to get to level 20 either. Now, I'm not trying to be depressing and say you're never going to get a character to level 20. Some people do, on rare occasions. But you have to realize that in the vast majority of cases, what's going to happen is you're going to play a long adventure or a few short adventures, and that's probably going to be the end of things. And that's actually okay. It's actually okay, as long as you're in it for the journey and not the destination. Think about my play-by-post group. We're going to be making one-person posts per day. Like, one person goes today, somebody else goes tomorrow. It's going to take us a month and a half to do a battle. If we get into battle, it's going to take us 3 weeks to do a dramatic task. It's going to take us 2 months to do our first opening scene in a tavern. We have to be in it for the journey, not the destination. Because, is this guy going to try to hit me? Because if we're in it for the destination, well, we're never going to get there, guys. It's going to take years. We've talked about, since we're playing Savage Worlds, we've talked about what counts as a session, because Savage Worlds has all of these sort of session-based resources. I think this is a good place to rest. It has all of these session-based resources, and we have to figure out, how are we going to sort of adjudicate that, because what's a session in play-by-post? So we talked about it, and the only idea I had, nobody had a better one, was maybe we could call, since a session is a period of real time, like 3 hours or whatever, let's call a period of real time a session. So then we said, well, how long would the period be? We're going to start, I don't know if it's going to work or not, 1 month. And so each month, bennies will refresh, right? And that's kind of how we're going to do it. And I don't know if that's going to work, but if that's true, in Savage Worlds, a lot of times you advance once every session or every 2 sessions, or sometimes the way people play it is they advance once a session at novice rank, and then every 2 sessions at seasoned rank, and every 3 sessions, and so on. I mean, yeah, it's going to take months to get to high rank, maybe longer. I don't know if I go milestone. I haven't really even thought about that. I'm probably going to do milestone. Well, it might be even longer than months to get to milestones, because again, it's play-by-post. So if you're in it for the end game, for the destination, I want to get to legendary, well, It's going to take you a minimum of 20 months. Who knows if our play-by-post is going to last 20 months? I hope it does. One of the people in it, this colleague of mine from work who's finally going to be able to join us, he said he ran a play-by-post Star Wars role-playing game campaign for 2 years, and it was a lot of fun. 2 years. And maybe at 2 years, they're not even third or fourth level yet, because it's play-by-post. It takes a long time. It's not about the instant gratification. The journey is what you're in it for in a role-playing game. The session and playing the session and playing your character is what you're in it for in a role-playing game, not the end game. So I urge people to play for the journey, not the destination. I think that if you do that, you'll be a lot happier, because then your happiness doesn't depend on getting somewhere. Your happiness depends on being in the moment. If you're just able to enjoy the session because it's fun to play, and you're not worried about whether you're going to level up this session or not, you'll have a lot more fun. So my fifth piece of advice is to be in it for the journey, not the destination. Heck, look at this game. This game is literally just the journey. There's almost nothing to do with the destination. Now, I mean, eventually when you make enough money, you can level up your garage, and when you make enough money, you can hire drivers. But all that does is, like, there's unless you want to, like, become a millionaire or something in the game, now that we own a truck, we don't have to do anything else but drive. And I have a nephew who plays this game. He does career mode, but, like, he keeps restarting it, and a lot of times he just does quick jobs, which really don't earn you a lot of money, but he's just in it to play. He doesn't care about building an empire. My plan, I mean, I like to do stuff in games, so my plan is to basically buy every single garage in the game and have every single one maxed out with a driver in every slot. And at that point, I've finished the game, right? But that is a months upon months upon months long goal. And until that happens, like, what you're doing here when you're playing, the actual time I spend playing, is the journey. It's driving. Because I like to do it. It's fun. I enjoy it. And I like ranting along with you guys. I'm in it for the journey. So my advice to you is be in it for the journey. Don't try to be in it for the destination, especially because in tabletop games, there's so many forces outside of your control when you've got multiple players, all of whom could have to quit or whatever. It's very, very hard to get to the end of a character. It's not like a computer game where you can just turn the computer game on and play it as long as you want until you get to the end. You can get to the end of most computer games, but most people don't get to the end of their TTRPG. So, instead of having a goal that's destined to make you unhappy, because you're almost never going to reach it, make your goal enjoy the session, enjoy the journey, enjoy playing the character as is right now. And if they level up and get better, great, but enjoy playing them as is right now. Now again, I am not saying that you shouldn't plan out your character. If you have a very specific plan in mind, go ahead and plan it out, but don't let your happiness hinge on being 18th or 20th level. Instead, let your happiness hinge on enjoying the session with your friends. Enjoy the journey of the character. See the character as a journey and enjoy the journey, rather than seeing the final form of the character as the destination and only being happy when you get there. So that is my next piece of advice. Enjoy the journey. There was another one that I was just about to do when I said the journey, but that one came up. Oh, yes. And related to that, and that's why I thought of this one, my sixth piece of advice would be, don't feel like you have to optimize your character. It's not that optimizing is bad, but so many people seem to think that the game, they simply can't play. Their character will die or the company will fail if they don't super, hyper, max out, min-max, optimize their character to the point where the character is essentially perfect and it can do the maximum damage, take the maximum number of hit points, do the maximum crowd control, whatever. You don't really need to do that in a tabletop role playing game. We've mentioned this before. Um, the you have to do it often in computer games because the computer game is built on assumptions about how players will scale their abilities as they level up. They're built on a bunch of those types of assumptions, and if you violate the assumptions of the programmer, there's nobody there to tweak things and ensure that you can still complete your tasks and finish your missions. But in tabletop role playing games, you have a game master sitting right there. He's watching what happens. And if he knows that you did not max out your character, he can easily make sure that he doesn't max out the bad guys. I have in this play by post game, all the players right now seem like they've come up with concepts that are nothing like optimized. They're actually quite non optimized. Many of them have plans to build into something cool. So I don't know if any of them are going to take an arcane background to begin with, and instead they're planning to like join a clerical order or build into an arcane background later. And because of that, they're not necessarily going to be optimized for spellcasting, even when they take the background. They're they're really cottoning on to this idea of playing peasants or commoners in a very authentic medieval feudal system, and working within those disadvantages and role playing about them and enjoying the limitations of their characters. So they're all making up sort of ordinary citizens rather than people with extraordinary pasts or chosen ones and things like that. And so that's not at all optimized. They don't seem to care. And I'm all for it because it makes for more interesting characters. And knowing they've done this, I will make sure that when I put the challenges in there, I take into account that I've got non-optimized player characters, and they might not be able to handle quite the level of challenge that an optimized group of characters would. And so I'll calibrate the challenge for them. We talked about that in a recently done episode. Is about whether it's the GM's job to do that or not. Yeah, I'll calibrate for their characters because their characters aren't optimized, and I like seeing players coming up with original, cool ideas that aren't pre-packaged, package deals that are super hyper efficient. I like it when player characters are like sort of realistic rather than efficient, because realistic and real characters, real people, aren't hyper optimized for everything. I'm certainly not optimized for my job. I do it anyway, but I have to fight my way through some of my own limitations in order to do it well. And one of the other players, who's actually a professor as well, she's got a learning disability that despite that she has a PhD, but it also presents certain challenges to her when she's teaching students because she doesn't learn the way average people do, and she's got to somehow teach to the average, the majority of students who learn more the way I do, but not the way she does. And so she's got to figure that out. Like, how do I teach to people who don't learn like me? It's not easy to do. And it's an additional handicap for her because she never had to learn this way. She learned a different way because of her learning disability. And so it's made it so she couldn't learn the way I do. She learned to compensate, and now she does it all a different way. And she has to, what's the word? She has to sort of vicariously figure out how they need to be taught so that she can teach people who don't learn the way she does. So she's not optimized for it either. And yet we manage to do our jobs. And so I find it much more realistic when you have suboptimal characters. I love it when characters aren't great at what they're supposed to be great at. I think I mentioned this. There's a video worth watching. It's done by several good players. It's Coffin Rock, Deadlands Coffin Rock, sort of an actual play with, I don't know, 4 or 5 episodes, and one of the players chose to play a huckster. Name's Elliot, I think. And I love this idea. Someday I want to. I've always said I don't want to play a caster, but I would play a caster like this. I love this idea. He's a huckster, and obviously hucksters are making like deals with demons and stuff to gain power. And so Elliot has these powers, but he's afraid of them. He's afraid that he's going to end up like possessed or something like this if he keeps doing the deal and using his powers. He's afraid they're going to corrupt him. He's afraid they're going to he's going to fall to the dark side, as it were. And so he tries not to use his powers even though he's got them. And so this is wildly suboptimal. There are many times in the story when the group would have dramatically benefited and things would have been dramatically easier for them if Elliot had simply used his dang powers that are on his character sheet. But the player didn't do it because Elliot was afraid of his own powers, and he was afraid. Oops, going this way. I thought I was going right. He was afraid to use them. He was afraid of what that would do. He was afraid that it would unleash a demon on the world or on himself. And I don't remember if maybe in his backstory he had like gotten possessed or something by it temporarily or something like that, which is another reason to be scared. And so he roleplayed that really well, and he only used his powers a couple times in 4 sessions, even though he had power points and he could have done it, right? Or even without the power points, he could have done the deal with the devil mechanic and stolen power points from the Manitou, right? But he was afraid to do that. His character was afraid. The player wasn't afraid. The character was afraid. And so this is a great piece of characterization that made Elliot my favorite character that I was watching. He was my favorite character. And he was my favorite character because he was being played wildly suboptimally, but so realistically. And I absolutely loved it. And if I'm the GM, oh man, is he going to be getting bennies from me. Because that's just awesome. And so I really like it when players do that rather than trying to be super hyper optimized min-maxed. And again, you do not need, in a role-playing game, you do not need, at the table, in a tabletop role-playing game, you do not need to be maximized. You do not need to be optimal. The group in Coffin Rock in this campaign, as tough as that scenario can be for new players, they handled everything and they succeeded and nobody died and they completed the scenario and they defeated the big bad evil guy and everything, all while Elliot's player was refusing to use his powers most of the time because Elliot was afraid of them. And it worked great. Nobody died, nobody's character died. They didn't fail the campaign. The bad guy didn't win. And so I would say that 6th piece of advice from me is don't feel like you have to hyper optimize your character. And don't be one of these people who says, when I say like do a character concept, you say, well, my concept is that I'm an optimized character. I recommend against that. Now look, some people get a tremendous amount of satisfaction after doing builds and out of doing builds and optimizing. And if you do, go ahead. But you shouldn't feel like you have to. You shouldn't feel obligated, and you shouldn't feel like, quote unquote, you're holding back the party if you're not optimized. Screw that. There is no holding back the party. If you're all role-playing and having fun at the table, that's enough. There's no holding them back. It's just not, this isn't an MMO, you're not on a raid. Things aren't on a hair trigger like that. And if somebody's telling you that you're holding them back by role-playing, I think they're in the wrong game. You're not doing anything wrong. So that would be my 6th piece of advice given as a GM to players. Don't feel the need to optimize. And I'm just going to pause here while I try to make sure I get around this very tight bend without crashing or knocking over any of those little sticks on the side there, whatever they're called, little pylons or whatever. Don't want to crash into the guardrail. So we're almost there, guys. We've almost arrived, and I think that those 6 points are probably enough. I don't need to do 20 like Luke Hart. There's a bunch of stuff that he said that, like, you know, bring pencils and paper to the session. Like, whatever. Okay, yeah, you should, but I'm not going to include that here. Luke gave some very good advice. I highly recommend watching his video on the 20 things that DMs wish their players knew or would like to tell their players. I've given you my 6. Hopefully that's been helpful and useful to a few people, maybe. Feel free to respond in the comments. Let me know. Do you agree with my 6? Do you think that those are things that as a game master, if any of you GM, you would also like to say to your players? Maybe your players already know those things. Do you disagree with any of them? Do you think, no, I don't agree with those as a GM? Or do you agree? Do you think those are good pieces of advice? Were there some that I missed? Are there some pieces of advice that you think might be even more helpful that I didn't manage to come up with? Let me know in the comments. And maybe we'll do another one of these if there are a bunch more of them. We have arrived with our cars. We're going to skip that one. Not in the mood. Plus our episode's over, so we'll just stop here. I don't think we're going to level up here, guys. But we did in the last drive, so I'll show you what I did. I bumped high value. I think that's what gave us the cars. So we're now nearly done with long distance. We can now drive up to 2,500 miles. We might be able to get from here to Texas. The last thing I always do is just-in-time delivery. I don't really care about this business of like, oh, you've got to get there really fast. I prefer a leisurely drive, so I'll unlock that last. We're going to go high value and fuel economy once we finish with long distance, and we got to start picking up some hazardous cargo because those increase the value of the load as well. And we're doing pretty well. We have $138,000. We need 180 to expand our garage. We really need 200 so that we have some ready cash after we're done. And then we'll get 2 more slots on our garage, and then we have to build up enough to get another truck, and then we'll assign this old truck to the driver that we hire. So that'll happen in the future. One thing I am going to do, let's look at the map here just briefly. I think what I'm going to do is tool around here a little bit. There are some things to find here. I think this is probably a dealer, and this is probably a recruitment agency. The more recruitment agencies you find, the more people you can recruit. So, for instance, where is it? The last time, if you remember, there was only 1 guy visible. Now there are 2, right? And the reason there are 2 people visible is because I found a second garage off screen. All of these question marks are the recruitment agencies, so we've only found 2. We need to find more. So there's 1 right here. We'll go ahead and grab that one. And obviously, when I get a chance in these towns that have the recruitment agencies and also the truck agencies, I need to make sure I drive into them. I just haven't been doing that because we've been doing rants, but I may do a little of that off screen. I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been American Truck Simulator Let's Rant with Scrapper.